In this video I want to show you a few more tips and tricks you can use for lighting your interiors. So the scene is basically lit by my modified advanced V-Ray sky. It has some purplish colors. Slightly changed the gradients from my previous video, but the basic idea is the same. It also has some artificial lighting inside, and I have these clear bulbs hanging down here and casting these interesting shadows on the floor. So the first thing I want to show you is how to add some more interesting details to this large area right here. Right now it's just a basic bright spot and it's not that interesting to look at. And sometimes it's a good idea to add something outside the room to create more detail here. And a good example to use would be something like a tree. So let's say I take this tree and I position it somewhere over here so that it casts shadows as the sunlight passes through it. Okay, so maybe something like this, maybe slightly towards the left. Alright, and we can try to render and see how it looks. And here's the result. As you can see, this area now looks much more interesting. You can experiment with the position and the rotation or the type of tree you use. It doesn't really matter. You just get some different patterns and try to find something that you like. And another thing you might want to keep in mind is that this tree is now visible in the rendering and visible in the alpha channel. If you do not want it to be visible, you can just right click on it. Okay, go to Object Properties and disable Visible to Camera and Visible to Reflection Refraction. And if you disable these two options, you still get the nice shadows, but you do not see the tree itself. I'm going to leave the tree itself visible for now. Right, so that's one way to get some more interesting shadow patterns instead of plain sunlight. Another way is to use some transparent curtains. So, for example, I have these curtains right here. I'll show you the material. So it's a V-Ray two-sided material with some basic V-Ray material set up in here. And the most important thing about this material is the refract slot. So you have the index of refraction set to 1.01 and you use a curve to mix between the transparent and non-transparent areas. So now the areas that are facing directly towards the camera will be transparent and the rest will not. Okay, so something like that. You can use some different values here, experiment with it a bit. If you have set that up, make sure you have Affect Shadows option on. Also set it to affect all channels and you can try and render. I'm going to hide the tree for now, so you can see how it looks just with this curtain here. And before we render, there is another important thing you must keep in mind. You should exclude the curtains from the skylight portal. And this will give you faster render times. And the final result will not be that different. Okay, so I'm just going to select my V-Ray light, go to exclude and make sure the curtains are added here in the exclude list. So let's render and see how the shadows look with the curtains. Okay, so curtains also give some interesting shadow patterns inside, but they block the view outside the window somewhat. So speaking of view, next thing I want to show you is how to add a background behind the window. So usually, even if you want to composite a background in Photoshop, it's still a good idea to have at least somewhat similar scene visible in your render as well. And the reason for this is that if you have this bright sky outside visible in the window, when you composite something different in Photoshop, you might get some brighter or darker edges along these sides of the window, and basically anywhere where you'd see the default sky that's in the environment slot. So for example, if you composite in an image where the ground is dark and the sky is bright, you're gonna get some weird bright edges in this area right here, or the bottom area of the window. So it's a good idea to have at least a somewhat similar scene right there when you render. So to do that, we're going to use our V-Ray plane. Make sure you are on a visible layer and create a regular plane. And what I want to do is I want to rotate the plane so it faces towards the camera. Okay, so like that. Right, and I also want to make sure that this plane does not cast any shadows and it does not block any light that comes into the room. So right click Object Properties and disable Receive Shadows and Cast Shadows. Okay. You also want to make sure that if you're using an override material that this plane is not affected, so I'm going to rename it and add it to my exclude list for V-Ray Global Material Override. Okay, so add the backplate. And now we want to create a material for it. And our material is going to be a basic V-Ray light material. And I'm going to use V-Ray light material instead of regular material with a diffuse map, because V-Ray light material does not get any shading on it. It just displays the image as bright as you set this multiplier right here. So it's easier to control and looks more realistic. So set up a bitmap in the color slot, and I'm going to use this image here. Turn on preview and assign to the plane. And now you can position it however you like. Maybe scale it a bit. Move around and try to match the horizon of your scene with the backplate. It's not that important if you're going to replace it later on. But still, it's nice to have it exactly like you want it. Alright, so you have this image. And let's render and see how it looks. So like, I can already see from the light cache that it looks kinda dark. If the room is so bright, I think the background should be much brighter. So let's start by bringing up the multiplier to something like 3. Alright, that's already better. I think maybe we can go up to 4 or 4.5, and that should be alright as well. Alright, and now I think the brightness matches the brightness of the room. It looks pretty realistic to me. Okay, so light balance is okay. So now let's render this little area right here. And I'm going to show you a little problem we have, and that is the alpha map. And when you render, you're going to see that our alpha map is solid white. And the reason for that is that our backplate actually generates alpha. And we want to turn that off by right-clicking on it, going to V-Ray Properties, and changing the alpha contribution to 0. Let's try again. Right, and it actually seems that we also need to change some settings for the glass material in the window, and set the reflection to affect all channels, and same for the refraction. I think that should fix it. Okay, and now we have the alpha just like we wanted. Not solid black, but some dark gray, so we have a hint of the glass visible. Okay, so that's how you set up a backplate for a scene like this. And you can change it out later on in Photoshop by using this alpha map as a mask. Okay, so let's unhide the tree. And render the scene with the materials turned back on. Alright, so everything looks pretty good, except for one thing, and that is these light sources right here. Right now we have this small, very bright spot, and it just looks a bit weird. So we might want to try and add some lens effects, like bloom and glare, to maybe improve the appearance of these bright spots. So first of all, I'm gonna take and select this small area right here. Actually enough to select just two of the lights. And then I'm gonna go to rendering, effects, and add V-Ray lens effects. Okay, so let's set up some options first. Turn on bloom. Okay, enable masking, turn on glare. Let's set it to from camera parameters, so we can set up exact parameters that affect this glare, and enable mask as well. Right, I'm also gonna try using diffraction. Okay, so let's try and see how it looks. We can choose to use interactive update by enabling this checkbox right here, and this is automatically going to cause re-rendering of your scene or selected area in your frame buffer. So keep that in mind if you have an unsaved render. Do not mess around with these options right here, because it might accidentally cause re-rendering the whole scene again. So let's wait for it to finish. Alright, and here's the result with both bloom and glare. So let's try to adjust some options to maybe make it less intense. So let's start with the glare. First of all, I want to turn down the weight. And it should update automatically, but sometimes you have to switch between the regular frame buffer and V-Ray frame buffer for the effect to be visible. Okay, so the glare is pretty weak right now. I kinda like it. You can try it without the diffractions. Okay, I kinda like it better with the diffractions. So something like this. So now let's try and adjust our bloom. First of all, I want to bring down the size. Okay, and maybe make it less intense as well. Right, not bad. And what the shape option does, it makes the light harder if you turn it up, and it makes it blurrier if you turn it down. So somewhere over here should be okay. Maybe slightly smaller. This kind of looks cool. Okay, let's turn down the glare again. And what I like to go for is a nice subtle effect. Not too strong, not too crazy. Maybe something like this. We can try adjusting some camera options here. For example, let's reduce the F number to make the rays a bit more pronounced. Maybe let's rotate the blades a bit, like 45 degrees. And it sort of rotates those arrays around. You can see, if you switch to the render element, glare mask and blue mask, you can see which areas are affected by this. In this case, only those bright spots are affected. Otherwise, our whole image would get this effect. Okay, so I think it's alright. Maybe let's turn down the weights a little bit. So 5 for the bloom. And let's say 4 for the glare. That kind of looks okay for me. Right, now I'm gonna unhide my curtains and render the scene to see how it all looks together. And here's our final image for the scene.